Thanks for downloading this podcast. It's for personal use only and must not be broadcast, reproduced, or used in any form without permission.
Tell your friends they can get their own copy wherever they get their podcasts.
The world's longest running motorsport magazine show, Midweek Motorsport. News, features, special guests, and analysis from the experts. Formula One, sports car and endurance racing, rallying, touring cars and bikes. If it has wheels and an engine, and they keep score, it's on Midweek Motorsport.
Hello everybody and welcome along to Midweek Motorsport. It is Wednesday, it's just after 8 o'clock here in the UK, which means it's just after 3 o'clock in the US. I'll be quiet to you there, Tim, sorry about that. I'll just turn myself up a little bit. There you go, that's a wee bit better. And we are on Series 18 Episode 9 in the simplest for 3 times in a row now, and Tim Gray is back with us. This is our final Midweek Motorsport before Sebring. No Midweek Motorsport next week because we have track action from WEC at this time next week. Actually, track action all over the place on RS1 and RS2. So no Midweek Motorsport next week. But Tim, welcome back, and on a packed programme tonight we have what? Hello, Tim. Hello, Tim. Not hearing you. Still not hearing you, Tim. If you're talking, Tim, I can't hear you at all up the line. So apologies for that.
Am I here?
Oh, there you are.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Right. A couple of things to
You panicked me there.
up on,
welcome back. Welcome back.
First of all, this time next week we won't be in the middle of WEC action. We'll be in the middle of Michelin Pilot Challenge action. The WEC doesn't start for another 25 minutes or so.
Yeah, okay, but you get my point.
And also, I think you'll find
track.
that it's not 3 o'clock on the East Coast, but 4 o'clock, because their clocks changed shortly after we left St. Petersburg on Saturday night.
No, I think they change at the weekend, actually. I think you're wrong there. They change over prologue weekends. But never mind, it doesn't matter. They do indeed change at the weekends. 12th of March, 1 hour forward. So we won each there then, Tim.
Fair enough.
Anyway, welcome back. And
it
on
is only 2 o'clock in Pensacola, though.
Well, okay. Welcome back, and on a packed programme tonight we have what?
We have all the usual features. We have a big interview with Johnny Molam.
Can't wait for that.
We haven't heard from this year so far, so
it's true.
I'm sure he has something to talk about.
He will have.
We will be looking back at all the weekend's race action from around the world, plus, for the first time in 2023, Nick Damon's team-by-team review of the Grand Prix of Bahrain.
Hooray! Hooray, hooray, hooray. Fantastic. Lots of news breaking tonight. We'll get across that the moment. Some news breaking. Well, we have to rewind back to the 24 hours, the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona. But first of all, let's have a... there's a lot of racing at the weekend to talk about as well. Let's have a look at the parish notices. Hello to Jesse Young, who's got EFAs for tonight. Eagerly looking forward to RC Racing's thoughts on the weekend. Hello to who? To Brody, out for dinner with some motorsport friends. We'll be listening on the archive. Marcel Duc. VLN test day this weekend, NLS next week. and is wanting to know who's involved with us. Well, Peter Snowden's involved all year, and it'll be a revolving door of Bruce Jones and Johnny Palmer who will be calling that. That's not this weekend, but next weekend.
Johnny doing the first one of those.
I think Johnny is doing the first one, yes.
What we should have done, because we haven't got a show next week, we should have got Peter Snowden on this week's show to preview it.
Yes, I hadn't realised that when Peter asked, and I asked Peter to do a preview. I didn't realise we didn't have a show next week until I looked at the schedule on Wednesday next, which is very, very, very busy. Hello to Kevin Payne, listening live again tonight. He was personally underwhelmed at the weekend. We'll have more about that later on. No AFAs from Alex Orkin this week. All the usual features he is hoping. Yes. Sports car news and BOP, possibly. Yes, we've got some BOP news. F1 politics and nature comments. Steak and chips this evening with a simple green salad. We had tonight here from the wonderful Responsible Adult Slow Roast chilled report with chili, black mustard seed, cumin and coriander rub on the crispy crackling mashed wheat bread, cabbage and broad beans. And pudding will be dark chocolate, chestnut and cranberry fridge cake with a Cointreau blood orange cream.
Oh, that sounds nice. I mean, the Cointreau blood orange cream sounds nice.
It all sounds nice.
I have one ingredient in common with you tonight.
Which is what?
Cabbage. Mine came from my garden, whereas yours didn't.
Well, no, I'm afraid not able to do that at the moment. AFAs from Otter.
I mean, yours didn't come from my garden.
Well, no, indeed not. Although, if you want. AFAs from Otter having stained glass windows installed. Looking forward to the podcast and the prologue this weekend. We will, with a bit of luck and a fair wind, have some special programmes from the WEC prologue this weekend. On a rare day off, Randy Brown is going out on a test drive in his Ford pickup truck after fitting new front brakes. Wish him luck, he says. If all goes well, I'll be on the podcast later. If it doesn't go well, then I won't be listening live, he says, anymore. It'll be fine. Oh, it's a bit dark, that, isn't it? Kuiper Hoffman is listening from a damp and chilly San Jose, California, for the last time in a few weeks before going to South Africa. What a race weekend at St. Pete's, especially the MX5 Cup races. Wasn't it just? Tom Marshalek, as usual, listening to the first hour at work, then the rest on the drive home. And wow, what a bomb drop with the Meyer Shank penalties, he's just said. AFAs from Matt Hunter from Simcast. He's at Crufts.
Yes.
Keep an eye on that top line. It is this week. Jerry Z.
Are they doing the show live from Crufts this week? That's the question.
I really hope it is. That would be fantastic. I love doing Crufts radio.
Really? Do they have sim dogs?
Sim dogs? Who knows? Hello to Jerry Z, who was trackside at the weekend and was on the coverage for the, I think it was the GT racing, wasn't it? He was trackside at the weekend with his pink Sparkle Fart shirt on. Hello to Mike Sargent, tuning in live tonight. Can't wait to hear the team's opinion on the Shank Tech infringement. And Randy Brown is listening tonight. He says, all is good, nothing caught fire and it stops without outside assistance. Excellent. Well done on the brakes then, in that case. Hello to Right Turn Lover this evening, and to Carol Brink. No love for the best coast. That would be the west coast and the left coast. She always tells me it's the best coast. Nice to know that you're in tonight. Snowy Bedfordshire. Nick Holland is listening in. It's snowing here as well, but not lying. Second week in a row for Hawkey Hawkins. That's Matt. Slightly snowy version in the depths of Northamptonshire. And also to Off in the S's. Should the Rolex win be taken away after... Can they not do it after results have been made official, says Off in the S's. We'll be discussing that in a few moments' time. At Specutainment, if you'd like to get in touch with us, good to have your company tonight.
All the latest motorsport news from around the world. Midweek Motorsport.
Tim has shuffled his papers, and this is our top story.
And for our top story, we need to bring in Nick Damon. Good evening, Nick.
Good evening, Tim. Good evening, John. Good evening, everybody. And of course, there have been Sim Dogs. It was one of the most popular games on the previous handheld Nintendo. Dogs with a Z.
Excellent.
I'm nodding my head in a very dog-like way at the moment.
Nick's
Like,
got
you know,
his
one of those
serious
nodding
voice
dogs
on
that
tonight.
I'm just macho tonight.
I can butch off him if you want.
No, keep me butched up, love.
All right, I'll keep you butched.
We're in it there.
All right.
Butch me up, love.
There comes the laugh that I wanted. Although it's not a particularly funny story for your poor old Johnny Ray, is it? Because we're going to start tonight's news at Mandalika in Indonesia.
Yes. It's not going very well, is it, for Johnny? In fact, it's not really going very well for anybody who's not got a
This
Ducati
is World
or
Superbikes, by the way, if you haven't worked this one out.
Isn't called Alvaro Bautista, who's now won 5 out of 6 races. The only way he didn't win was when he had to come in together with Johnny Ray. No one's fault, really. The track was very filthy off line and fell off.
You mentioned
he's won every race.
It's not good for anyone who's not on a Ducati, but actually it's just not good if you're not called Alvaro Bautista, because Rinaldi's on a Ducati and he's got fewer than about a third of the number of points of Bautista. And top break was Glioglu and Andrea Locatelli are second and third.
Yes. But
and they're both in Yamahas.
The thing to remember is that Axel Bassani is doing very well in a customer Ducati, and he's a little bit crazy. But Michael Rubin Rinaldi is not consistent. So you have to kind of go, is he really...
Michael Rubin Rinaldi had a horrible weekend at Phillip Island because he doesn't like racing in the wet, and that's why he's so far back. He's much better in the dry.
It wasn't much better this weekend.
He was quicker, shall I say? All right, I'll put it that way.
Wasn't I think he was chosen over Chaz Davis 2 years ago on the back of a result of a very good weekend at Aragon. Aragon's the track with that big wall, isn't it? It is Aragon, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that.
He had a great weekend at Aragon, and he obviously has the correct passport, so he was given the Ducati factory ride, which he has completely failed to live up to in the past 2 years. Whereas Alvaro obviously has shown what can be done with that bike, as are some of the privateers. I mean, Danilo Petrucci's even doing quite well, given the fact he's way too big for the bike, and he is coming back to it. But yes, it was a bad weekend for Johnny Ray. Race 1, tyre went away, finished nowhere, I think 9th. Race 2, he had that incident with Bautista, I think it was 4th. And in race 3, in the second full race, he fell off on the difficult surface, where if you get a chance to watch any clips from it, if you want a definition of a one-line track, that was where it was. It's a lovely brown line. The brown line was what? Do you reckon it was a metre wide, John? Perhaps a metre and a half.
Metre
and that
and
was
a half.
it.
Yeah.
And that was it. And he went off that line. It was, ice, basically.
And you could see, because later on in the race, other people did the same thing and got off the throttle, but dropped 3 or 4 places. By the way, just in defence of Michael Rubin Rinaldi, he has had 2 second places. He's only 2 podia, by the way, but he's had 2 out of 6 podium finishes at the moment, as opposed to Axel Bassani.
They were both in Australia, where the Ducati was unbelievably better than everything else.
And he was also fastest on Friday at Mandalika, ahead of his
doesn't
teammate.
Count for anything.
Well,
Valtteri Bottas has been fastest hundreds of times and didn't win any races. It doesn't count for anything.
That's the point that Nick's making, because he's behind Axel Bassani, who's had 0 podia this year. And, so, yeah, I accept. I don't think, though, that it's fair to say that it's only Alvaro who can ride the Ducati, in fairness. But anyway.
I don't think he is, but he's doing it better than everyone else.
Yes, he is. He is.
Toprak managed to get 2 seconds in the main races, and he won the sprint race, obviously after Bautista was knocked off. But he tripled here last year. So this was an absolute cracking Yamaha circuit, and a year later it's gone over red, I'm afraid. So this championship looks almost as unlikely to give us an interesting outcome as any other major FF World Championship we can talk about.
The only thing I would say is the difference here is that there are I want to put this the right way because I don't want people to think that I'm hoping this would happen, because I'm absolutely not. In MotoGP and World Superbikes, you can never look at a big points lead and say, well, that's it, it's all over. Because all it takes is for somebody to fall off and hurt themselves and miss 2 or 3 weekends. And then things change massively, particularly in World Superbikes where there's 3 races in a weekend. And please don't think I am saying, I hope that happens to Alvaro so it tightens up the championship. No, I'm not saying that. But he's had 3 out of 6 fastest laps. Jonathan Ray's had 2 out of 6. Domi Agata has had the other fastest lap in the races. So that has been slightly spread out. Agata, by the way, I think has been brilliant. He's had a bit of bad luck, and he wasn't very good in the wet either at Phillip Island when he qualified up front in the dry. But Domi Agata, electric bike champion, and also Moto2 champion, isn't he? He's come through, and the Swiss driver Hop Swiss, we're down at the moment in 10th, but I think he's going to have a good season for his first season in Superbikes. Go on, Nick, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. I think one thing I would say, I think Toprak's doing the best he can. I think
Toprak's doing very well.
He's putting in some great performances. I just think the bike's got it. And the Kawasaki's an absolute basket case. It's not quick, and it's got terrible rear tyre wear. So they've gone backwards since last year. So goodness knows how they got that wrong. They do have 6 weeks to work on it, though, which is good news. Because the next round Aston isn't until the middle of April.
Got some tweets coming in. Michael Ruben Rinaldi threw at least 2 positions on the last lap, says right turn lover. Yes, he did. Hello to Rob Bonza, who is tuning in from his garage in Sheffield. He's trying to find out where he put the snow shovel. A few
it's buried
weeks ago,
under the snow.
Well, yes, of course. That's where you put it. Sir Phil is really losing faith in series these days. Such a shame about the results after the Rolex. Talk about that in a wee minute. He also says, watch the highlights. I probably won't watch them again. Sean Crockett is working with Surrey, listening to the podcast on the way home, snow permitting. And David Riley is saving the podcast for Saturday's flight over to Florida. Oh, excellent. Oh. And Sarah Rigby says, not long got home from work from a busy day at work. We'll be tuning in, doing other thing in the background. Not up to full speed with the sports car news today. Sarah will help you out with that. Tim, where would you like to go next?
We're staying on 2 wheels. First, a question for Nick.
Okay.
This is probably less relevant now, but think back about a decade and a half.
Right.
When you went away on long work trips.
Yes.
Did you bring back presents for your children who you'd abandoned?
No. I went away on so many work trips, I've been bankrupt.
Alicia Spargrove's children always now tell him what they want him to bring back from his trips away. Oh.
From the documentary was out last year where they followed them around for a year. The kids seem to be with them every race, so I'm surprised he actually needs to bring them back anything.
Who was that? Sorry?
Alicia Spargrove.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
What have they been asking for? They ask for themed gifts.
No, they just want him to bring a trophy back every weekend.
No.
I'm sure he's quite happy if that is the case, to be honest.
Yes, because they don't cost him anything, really, do they?
I probably another seat on the plane. I think he'd be very happy if he could bring back a trophy for the Bairns every weekend.
Yeah. It sounds like a PR release rather than the actual request from a child, to be honest.
Well, I'm not sure that the child do have their own PR, in fact.
Yeah, they do, some of them. Yeah, that's true, actually, yeah.
Moving on.
Not Alex. Josh Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
The once controversial Australian.
Yeah.
Is returning to the Isle of Man this summer.
Right.
He's going to be taking part in the TT with a FHO Racing BMW.
Which luckily, the BMWs are much better at doing the TT than they are at doing World Superbikes, where they are spectacularly not working.
It's his first trip to the Isle of Man for 5 years. Mm-hmm. He's going to be doing...
Well, those steam packet prices are very high, aren't they?
Those both Superstock races, Superbike TT and the Senior TT, all on his BMW M1000RR, alongside 9-time winner Peter Hickman.
He's getting value for money out of the bike. They're doing 4 TTs.
Yes.
Good point.
He made his debut at the TT in 2013, where he set the fastest newcomer's lap record.
It's just mad. It's insane what they do around there.
I have to go and see it before it gets banned.
Well, they're going to have to change the date, aren't they?
Are they?
Well, no, they're going to have to because it always clashes.
Well, sorry. Do you mean if I ask them nicely, they might change it so that it's...
Yeah, give it a go, John. You've got a lot of pull.
All right, okay.
I
know people in the Isle of Man.
This year, the first practice is on Monday the 29th of May.
Yeah.
So...
Right.
Yes, and I'm at Le Mans on the 1st of June.
Yes,
so
you can go
not really happening.
You can go to 3 days of it.
Yeah, but the first race isn't until Friday, is it?
It's not. Well, first Superbike race is until
Sunday. Do you
Sunday.
not think I might just because I don't go to Le Mans till the 1st of June, it doesn't mean that I'm not busy sorting out
Get a helicopter,
everything.
get out there.
Yeah. Oh, there's nothing for me to do other than just get in the car on the 1st of June and drive over.
Yeah, I can't believe he's so negative, John. Honestly.
And that, dear listener, is why I can't go to the Isle of Man TT.
I mean,
Right.
You've missed going to Le Mans twice, haven't you? So
Yeah, but I haven't missed working on it.
no, but you could still work on it from the Isle of Man.
I'm not...
What?
No, but I can't...
Really?
but
Not sure the boss would
unfortu-
agree, but
But unfortunately, if we are all going to Le Mans, and he said to the Isle of Man there, we could all just go to the Isle of Man and do it from there, I suppose. I'm sure Greenlight would help with facilities. If we are going to Le Mans, then I have stuff to do to support the people who are going. So, it is quite important that I'm there, to be honest.
Nick,
and that's
you're able
nothing
to go
do
to
with
the Isle of Man, aren't you?
No, he's not. He's busy that weekend. He's got a European RC something or other, haven't you?
I'm busy that weekend, and then Monday I'm trundling out to Le Mans. So, no, I'm afraid I'm actually busy that weekend. So I also could have gone to those first 2 days of practice.
We can watch it, though, because it'll be streamed.
Yes, that's the thing. It's all streamed live these days.
It is, which is great. But I'd still like to go. I mean, I would like to go on my motorcycle. Because, obviously, why would you go in a car?
Well, I'd go on a ferry, but that's just me.
Honestly, I reckon Nick's bike could get enough speed up if we put a decent ramp up somewhere near Liverpool. We would get across.
Do you remember about 40 years ago on Blue Peter?
Yeah, like yesterday.
Like yesterday to me, that mate.
Blue Peter, they tried to drive across the Irish Sea in a Morris Minor.
Wasn't that Top Gear?
No.
I know. Blue Peter did everything first.
It's all John Noakes.
Everything.
I think this was
Peter
Peter
Purvis.
Duncan, but yeah. Would have been beyond the...
They were mega.
Beyond the time of John
Anyway,
Post Noakes.
you're listening to
Post-Noakes.
Midweek.
Yeah.
We are listening to Midweek Motorsport. It's the 18th season and the 9th episode. We're still in news, and Tim Gray's going to take us away from two wheels now.
I am going to take you away from two wheels. I have nothing more to say that has two wheels.
Right, okay.
Now, we do have some breaking news, and we were waiting for Meyershank Racing to actually make a statement about this before we told you the story. They have done that now. So let's do the story, which is that Meyershank Racing have been penalised for manipulating tyre pressure data at the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona, which in my mind is some very, very clever cheating.
Intentional software offsets have been reported, and this discovery, according to reporting by John DeGeese and Sportscar 365, made by Honda Performance Development. after IMSA posted the official race results for the Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona.
So my first question is, why didn't IMSA's scrutineers pick up on this earlier? Or pick up on this at all?
They take live tyre data that comes in from the tyre pressure monitoring sensors.
Mm-hmm.
If there have been, as has been quoted, intentional software offsets, as reported by HPD, by the way, that is the manufacturer for whom Mike Shank and Meyer Shank Racing are competing and collecting manufacturer points. I suspect that so long as they were getting the data, they were quite happy with it. I also absolutely know that in future, that's going to be something that's going to be looked at very much closer. As outlined in attachment 3.6.36.E of the WeatherTech Championship Sporting Regulations, failure to adhere to operational requirements is prohibited and subject to a range of penalty, and any violation may be penalised to the full extent listed in Article 57. Now, it's all about minimum tyre pressures as specified by the tyre supplier Michelin. The team and the drivers have lost 200 of its 350 WeatherTech Championship points earned in the race. I presume any points for the Michelin Endurance Cup as well. Yes, all teams and driver points from the Michelin Endurance Cup. Loss of the race prize money, as well as a $50,000 fine. Mike Shank has been placed on probation through to the end of June, and the engineer Ryan McCarthy has been stripped of his IMSA credential and placed on indefinite suspension. Now, IMSA have said that no changes will be made to the official race results, which were, let's not forget, made final before this came to light. The number 60 team will retain the victory, the race trophy, and the drivers will keep the watches. All of the other drivers and teams will retain the points commensurate with their finishing position, as shown on the official race results. There'll be no change to GTP manufacturer points. My Shank Racing have said, we accept the series decision and we have taken responsibility. We'd like to apologise to everyone at Acura, HPT and all of our partners. We have dealt with this issue internally and the team member that was responsible is no longer with the organisation. Put two and two together there and make five, guys. We do not want this error to overshadow the tremendous effort that our team drivers and all of our partners have put forth to develop the new LMDH car. We consider the matter closed and are fully focused on resetting and coming back for the 12 hours of Sebring. Now, Nick Damon is with us. You were there. You saw what went on. There was a number of reasons why the Acura was much quicker than everybody else, including the other Acura, because they couldn't change their downforce when they wanted to on the Konica Minolta car because they had a broken dowel on the gearbox, so it would have taken them too much time to do that. We also know that Acura don't care about BOP for Le Mans, therefore they're driving flat out in the early part of the IMSA season and are going to try and rack up as many points as they can. However, it seems as though there was a slightly bigger advantage to the MSR car than even we had thought about.
Yeah, they would be running low tyre pressure. They had more grip than everyone else, and the tyres were warmed up quicker during coming out of yellow flag period. It's absolutely ridiculous they're not stripped to the win. It was so close at the end.
It's the American way, though, Nick, isn't it?
Well, it's the wrong way. I'm happy to say right now it's completely ridiculous. They've cheated, and they've been caught cheating. They've admitted cheating. They need to lose the result and give the watches back. It's not even an argument. It's not even a conversation. It's a major cheat. It's not a minor little thing. It's a major cheat.
What they seem to be seeing in their release on Twitter and elsewhere is that it was the actions of a single member of the crew who's been sacked.
Who's no longer with the team.
So how do you monitor tyre pressure?
Tyre pressure monitoring
when
system.
You're pumping the... No. When you're pumping the tyres up.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And when you're taking a check at any point, it's a man with a tyre pressure gauge.
Is that one person?
Gauge, well, team. This is the whole time. So lots and lots of people have taken tyre pressure readings, and
no, but that's what I'm saying, Nick. You're making that assumption. Is this the person? Is this solely down to the person?
Because I don't believe the man who wields a tyre pressure gauge is also the man who designs software offsets.
Okay.
It's a.
Do they not
cheat.
measure the pressures when they change
I think
the tyres?
it's impressive. Yes.
So
when the tyres
you
go off,
have the
the
same
tyres come
person doing all four corners. You have two
No,
people
no,
doing two corners each.
I mean, you have no idea what the scale of it is, and you don't know whether it's something which is just a clever little early cheat, and they end up getting up to the very similar pressures at the end, because they couldn't be wildly out, because I'm sure that Michelin were taking measurements as well at some point.
Well,
so,
and that is a very good question, and Michelin haven't commented on this as yet. But there is a Michelin engineer who is embedded with the team. Now, I don't know if Ryan McCarthy is a MSR person or a Michelin person, so I'm not qualified to say that.
Well, why would a Michelin person bend the rules of one team? It doesn't make any sense. The fact is that I don't believe it's single person. It's as bad as you've cheated, you've won a major race. They've got and I'm impressed that Honda have come clean. Immediately, Honda weren't going to lose, because even if they'd lost the lead, they still would have won, because this car that came second was also an Acura, so it wasn't the end of the world for them either way. They got them kicked out.
Good point.
But no, it's if you do a clever cheat, fine, but you have to accept the consequences. Ferrari, it was 3 years of not winning.
The Daytona Museum at the International Speedway has a special exhibit about people who bent the rules and were caught. Some of them who weren't caught for years, some of them who didn't admit it for years. This is a phenomenal entry in that, isn't it?
Yeah, and lots of people get away with these things, and we go, well done. But if you can't take the punishment, don't do the crime. Yeah, and currently what they've been is a tiny slap on the wrist, because they got all the PR.
Well,
my question is, sorry, just to finish on this before we move on, Tim. Does this mean in the future then? What does this mean in the future, I should say, for the series monitoring pretty much anything? I mean, a few years ago, there was a major German manufacturer who manipulated I'll say the word, I'll use that word, manipulated the turbo boost pressures in WEC and Le Mans by their sensors, which led ultimately to series putting in their own sensors. Tyre pressure monitoring is something that's pretty fundamental. Are we going to have an IMSA scrutineer take the tyre pressure of every tyre before they go onto a car? Because clearly we can't, currently IMSA cannot take the information that they are getting from the teams and the manufacturers. They can't take it as read. No,
I don't know the answer to that question. It depends whether this offset is easy to. It depends if once you're looking for it, which they weren't looking for, obviously, now they're looking for it, whether it's easy to find. The only thing I would say is they found someone who can cheat the tyre pressure monitoring system. You should get a job pretty quickly in MotoGP. They're desperate for someone who can do that.
We'll see what else happens. It is Sebring next week. The cars are on the track midweek. And we'll be there to see that on RS2. No Midweek Motorsport next week, because we have Pilot Challenge and WEC on the air on respectively RS2 and RS1, whilst we should be on air next week. And
actually, at this point next week, it will be WEC.
WRC, yes.
No, WEC, not WRC.
WEC.
That never happens on a Wednesday.
Yeah,
I'd love to see
great.
that.
It's quite rough at Sebring, but...
Can I just say, by the way, Yeah, let's very quickly do a couple of tweets on this. Right Turn Lover says, let's put it this way, if Mr. McCarthy is the only person involved with this, he'd be a multi-dimensional, talented and active person. Is it a factor, says Nick, not this Nick, the other Nick, that Honda brought this to the attention of IMSA? Perhaps that's what's swimming in terms of penalties, and how come the authorities didn't work it out? The MSR penalty seems in line with other top motorsports. Formula One, he says. Keep the win in the trophies. What is it with Top Line Motorsport? Surely if you're found to be outside the rules, you're out. The punishment doesn't fit the crime. That was from Neil Gardner. Hello, Neil, our artist in residence. I'm sorry, says Matthew Hindman, but the MSR number 60, keeping the most prestigious prize for winning Daytona, is keeping the fact of being the winner of the Rolex 24 Daytona. It's not enough. He says there... Could this explain why the Acura ran so little during the practice sessions at Daytona, says Jerry Z. Fine. How can they keep the win for from a number of people? At Specutainment, we'll take some more of those later on. We're still in the news, Tim. Where would you like to go to next?
Well, I wasn't going to move on because I still have a point to make on this, which is
right.
that following on from this subject, we still need to talk to Crispian Besley on this show, don't we? Who's the author of the new book, very good book, Driven to Crime, which has a lot of stories about people who cheat in the world of motorsport, as well as do other naughty things in the world of motorsport.
I was going to say that some of that was outside the circuits as well.
Yes.
In fairness, quite a lot of it, and most of the most heinous stuff was well outside the purview of any motorsport
None of the
organisation.
murders actually took place on track.
Indeed. At Specutainment, please, if you've got anything on that. IMSA tyre pressure fakery, Daytona BOP is a reaction to crying wolf, says Alexander Orkin. Win sub should be stripped, full stop, says Vern at Davester 1986. At Specutainment, if you want to get in touch. Midweek Motorsport 18th series, 9th episode. Tim Gray up in London. Where to?
Well, it's a shame that this Ryan McCarthy's had his credentials permanently removed, because he sounds like one of the most interesting people in the paddock. And the most interesting people in the paddock are what Tony Calderon and Brad Payton are looking for their open casting call next week. For a brand new
what do you mean to do?
Fly on the Wall series.
Open. Right. Nick, you are going to Rue, not going to Daytona, to Sebring. Open auditions, love. It's perfect for you.
Another opening, another show.
Tim, explain what this is all about.
So, it's the story of Pro-Am Motorsports in the USA. It's a Fly on the Wall documentary series, and they are looking for people who have interesting stories to tell in the world of sports car racing.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tony Calderon is no stranger to this, having produced the Gentleman Racer.
Driver, yes.
Gentleman Driver, excuse me, yeah.
Which was a documentary a couple of years ago. And Brad Payton, of course, is the Hollywood director of blockbuster films like San Andreas.
Ah, okay. No fault involved there with anybody either. Maybe MSR need to talk to him about that one. When is this?
So on Wednesday at Sebring, I believe they're having their auditions.
Another reason why we can't do a show, obviously, because I'll be busy auditioning. Hello, loves. I'm representing Nick Damon. Hello.
I'd now like to tap dance 1967 for one season.
Yeah. I think that was 1968 you were tap dancing there, to be fair.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I started on New Year's Day, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. Yeah, moving on.
The auditions are open to any participants and insiders from any IMSA-sanctioned series, so it's not just WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. They'll also be talking to people from the Michelin Pilot Challenge and the Porsche Carrera Cup North America, and what we're going to talk about next, which is the Mazda MX-5 Cup presented by BF Goodrich.
The Idemitsu Mazda MX-5 Cup.
MX-5 Cup, yes.
It was absolutely superb. at the weekend. What do you want to talk about, Tim?
I
Just
mean,
generally talk about it?
It was absolutely superb, but they did have an issue with actually doing any racing and not driving around behind the safety car, didn't they?
Well, yes and no.
And it
because
wasn't unique to the Mazdas. I'm
No.
willing to say that. But
Well, okay, so
they
in the
started
first
the
race,
trend.
in the first race, they had, I think, 2 safety car interventions for a couple of laps each time. So they still had around about 35 minutes racing in that. That race was won by Gresham Wagner, and in doing so, he took the series lead after the first race on Saturday morning, St. Pete's time, from who went into the weekend? Tyler Gonzalez went in with a 100-point lead, didn't he? Connor Zilic was second, Sam Paley was third, the best of the rookies, Thomas Annunziata for Hickson, in what was going to be a very good weekend. It was slightly... Now, bear in mind that there was a second race on Saturday afternoon, then you can kind of understand why perhaps there was less carnage in the first race than the second race, which had it had 2 very big incidents. Both really came about from somebody slapping the wall at turn 3. Now, again, that wasn't unique to Mazdas on the streets of St. Pete either. In the end, we only had 17 of the 26 cars running at the end of the race. Last year's champion Jared Thomas was out. Tyler Gonzalez, who came in the weekend leading, was out. Gresham Wagner, who was leading the championship by the time we got to that race, was out. Thomas Annunziata, who was the best of the rookies all weekend, was out. And also Peter Atwater, Matthew Dirks, Nate Cicero, Jean Jourdain, and Rossi Lee were all out. And the bulk of those, in fact, all of those were in two incidents that happened down at turn 4 when somebody slapped the wall at turn 3, broke a suspension, and then ran into someone else and caused a domino effect. That sort of was repeated on Sunday in IndyCar as well. It meant that Connor Zilic won from Aaron Johnson in second and Alex Bashura in third because who got the penalty? Robert Noaker got the penalty and was bumped down because we finished under caution. He was bumped all the way down to 15th because he didn't take the drive-through. Connor Zilic leads the championship. Congratulations to Grant Ward, who was inside the top 10 at 7th, who was the best rookie in race 2. Heather Hadley was second in the Rookies Cup, and Jonathan Neudorf was third. So as far as it comes at the end of it, as I say, Connor Zilic leads the championship as we go into quite a long break. I'm hearing from the early thought it was a particularly bad weekend for Macumbi Macaleer Racing, who had John Jourdain, Nate Cicero and Matthew Dirks all involved in incidents. And John started one of those, in fairness. I'm hearing that all of those cars could be total write-offs. They may be looking for 3 brand new cars. Sam Paley, the only one of the MMR cars to get through the weekend without damage in incident. They've got a long time, Tim, before they are back, because they are not back for about 2 months, actually. However, it was a bit untidy, I think it's fair to say, particularly in the second race.
And the carnage continued in the Indy Next race as well. Which had Louis Foster on pole.
Yeah.
But it was...
This is what, Indy Next, yeah?
Yes. Jacob Abel, who led the most laps. And neither of them got the win because Daniel Frost took the lead either on the last lap or the penultimate lap to steal it away. And I'm going to need Nick Damon to help me here, but I can't think of a major single-seater race anywhere in the world that's been won by a driver from Singapore before?
He led 2 laps.
Yeah.
David
No,
Frost.
I can't
And
think of
penultimate.
any either. I cannot think of a
Formula
Singapore
Regional
one.
Series somewhere. Or
I wouldn't
something
call that
like
major
maybe.
seaters.
All right, okay. Well, no, that's fine. But I'm only thinking about something in
I'm with
region.
you. It's in that city state. There's obviously not a lot of places to practice racing. They can go up the road to Sepang, of course. It's 80 miles away, I think.
Yes. So, again, quite a lot of cautions. 13 laps of caution in a 40-lap race around the streets of St. Petersburg. That's a third of it. And how many people didn't finish? Only 5 non-finishers in the end.
4 of which were for contact.
Yes,
Nannini,
two pairs.
Josh Pearson.
Pearson and Nannini.
And then Jonas
and then Jones and Ahmed, yeah.
Yeah. And Jamie Rowe had a mechanical issue. Jamie
gearbox.
Chadwick had a difficult weekend and had, I think, at least 3 incidents at Turn 4. Again, I'm not passing any judgment there. She wasn't the only person that was doing that. Ended up finishing off the lead lap.
Yes, she was 2 laps down. Oh, no, 1 lap down.
Right. But got some points. 17 points for the 13th. And who did we say was on pole? That
Louis
was
Foster. He finished 2 laps down.
Yeah.
Barely running.
Yeah, correct.
He was running, but with only 3 wheels actually connected to his car in the way they should have been, because the left rear was rather hanging off.
Or hanging on.
They are back at Barber in 3 weeks' time.
Excellent. And we might as well... Are we going to talk about Indy whilst we're
Yes,
here?
we're going to talk about Indy here, because...
what do you want to say about IndyCar?
Well, qualifying for IndyCar still, I think, takes too long. But
do you know what?
I think
it
it
would
was
have taken...
clear at the end of qualifying that the whole weekend was going to be dominated by Andretti, wasn't it?
Can I just say the one thing I do like about them is that they get a guaranteed amount of time per session, and if the red flag comes out whilst everybody is out on their last lap, everybody's allowed to go out and do one flyer at the end. Unfortunately, that adds time. I tend to think...
It's the gaps
Tim,
between sessions that are the issue.
Well, I tend to think, Tim, it would just be better for everybody to do an out lap, a flyer and an in lap as a single lap qualifying, or, maybe 1 or 2 cars out on track at the time. It could not take any longer, could it?
No. Maybe send them all out for the first 15 minutes and then do 1 lap each.
Honestly, it couldn't take any longer. It isn't. I know it's similar to Formula One, but it just doesn't work in the same way. It is track dependent. It is very much track dependent.
It's similar to Formula One, but they have less track time, and it takes longer.
Yeah. By the way, I should just mention that in all of the Mazda stuff, Mazda lost their first practice session. And there were delays on the Saturday as well. So that was Friday, because it was only a 2-day meet for the Idemitsu Mazda Championship, because communications with the Marshall Force went down on both days.
They had to revert to old-fashioned radios.
Old-fashioned radios, yeah. And both days, they couldn't get them working properly. So they lost the whole 40-minute session on Friday, and it was a bit delayed on Saturday. No, I don't disagree with you, Tim, in terms of IndyCar, the NTT IndyCar Series. I like what they're trying to do, and splitting up the 2 halves of the grid. The problem is we've got so many cars now, and that's great. But what did we have? 27 at the weekend. The 2 halves of the grid, Tim, are just as big as we've seen in the past. So, in fact, probably much bigger than we've seen in the past for some series that only have 15, 16, 17 cars. So it is it is difficult, but it has to, because it has such a knock-on effect to the rest of the programme, because of the guaranteed running that they have, which I'm a fan of because they are the top series. I think something needs to be looked at, but obviously it's not going to happen this year.
So as I was saying, after qualifying, clear that Andretti were going to dominate the race.
And they didn't. Michael Andretti...
Well, they did in one respect, didn't they?
They dominated the repair bill.
They dominated the drivers who were out with damaged cars. They weren't the only ones, but poor Michael Andretti had his head in his hands. Just keep repeating that piece of video, Nick, wasn't it?
Yeah, but you sit there and you go, both Will Power and McLaughlin deserve significantly more than a drive-through. They basically fenced the guy out of the race. Now, it happened to be into a tyre barrier at 70 miles an hour, but on a real track, if you did that, that just isn't. You've got to give way. You can't just, say, "Oh, yeah, you can crash." Frankly, both of them should be on race bans, in my opinion.
McLaughlin did have the good grace to own up to it.
Fine. Yeah, apologies. It doesn't count.
No. I know that.
He's still got 20 points.
Red mist, stupidity. Yeah, red mist, stupidity, race ban. Same for Power, race ban. Because you've completely fenced a guy. Yes, it looks less bad because they're not doing any speed. But that's what you've done. You've not given any room. Yes, now you've pushed him off into a bit of gravel and come back on again. He's out the race and you carried on. No, you're parked. You're banned.
Will Power got 26 points. Scott McLaughlin got 20 points, Tim.
Yes.
Winner was Marcus Ericsson from Pato O'Ward after the late-ish race caution between Romain Grosjean and Scott McLaughlin, where they tried to go side by side through turn 4, and it was never going to work. Scott Dixon is always the answer, and he certainly was this weekend. Kept his nose clean, stayed out of trouble, and finished up in third, ahead of Alex Rossi in fourth, Callum Eilert in fifth, Graham Rahal in sixth position.
A couple of other drivers I want to mention.
Yes.
Firstly, Agustin Canapino.
13th.
A rookie. He was 12th, actually.
He scored his 13th in the championship behind Marcus Armstrong. And
he is, but that's because Scott McLaughlin got points for qualifying.
Just said that.
Well, okay. Sorry.
But he was 12th in the race.
I see what you mean, yes.
And I thought that for a rookie who wasn't particularly impressive, NBC gave him an inordinate amount of TV coverage.
Is he managed by one of the TV talent?
Don't know.
I'm just putting that out there. Agustin Canapeno, we have seen in a number of bits and pieces. He's come out.
Absolutely. We've seen him in the Argentinian TC2000 Championship.
Yes, but he's
a lot of virtual stuff as well.
He does a lot of virtual stuff, and he's raced in the WeatherTech Championship as well for Young Cost Racing in the Cadillac DPI. He raced at Daytona and Sebring in 19. Did he? No, he didn't race that year at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. But we have seen him doing a lot, Nick, of pro iRacing stuff.
Yeah, that's how I know him. So, yeah. I mean, I must admit, I thought he was I must have got him mixed up with somebody else. I thought he was a Porsche specialist, so I was surprised to see him in IndyCar.
He's done. I don't think he's done any single-seater for. If he's done any, it hasn't been for quite a long time.
He raced in South American Formula 3 in 2011 for High Tech.
Oh, right, okay. I hadn't gone back that far. Oh, no, yes, I see that now. High Tech Racing Brazil.
Yeah.
He was 11th in the championship.
Yes. So that's his pedigree. So I suppose on that respect, it is to come into IndyCar having not done many single-seater races at all and not for 12 years is quite impressive. Even so, I thought he got rather more coverage than perhaps he deserved.
Was the broadcast going to some major Argentinian channel?
Yes, but who in Argentina speaks English well enough to understand what Lee Diffie's saying?
Don't think it just needs to be the pictures.
It's all the Visit Argentina pictures.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And the other driver I want to talk about is another rookie, and that's Benjamin Pedersen, who looked way out of his depth, in every practice session, way out of his depth in qualifying. Didn't qualify last based on the draw, basically, and then should have been banned for his part in the crash on lap 1.
Yes.
Kind of feeling that Tim and I make much better stewards than the IndyCar stewards.
Yes. Max Papis, we're coming for your job.
Well, Max knows better than most people about elbows out driving, shall we say. I like him. I like him a lot. What's Benjamin Pedersen done beforehand?
He's been very average in a number of American Junior Single-Seater Series.
All right. Okay.
I think he's rich.
He was listed as the first retirement.
Yeah.
After that lap 1, turn 3 incident, he was sort of the catalyst for that, wasn't he?
No, he was the one who drove into the back of Devlin De Francesco and launched him into the air so that he could pirouette completely.
I don't think necessarily you can blame him for that because he was unsighted by a car in front of him.
He could still have stopped or swerved.
It's very different when you're in a racing car with your backside half an inch off the ground. You can't see what the television sees, and he ended up with and he was faced with cars across the track in front of him. What I will say is, well done the AMR safety crews, who did a cracking job with particularly clean-up. Well done to Delara and to the aero screen, because they certainly did their job. But I've got to say, as much as I love St. Pete's, I'm not sure it's safe for Indy cars anymore. I'm really not sure it's safe for Indy cars anymore. I don't know what was going on between turns 1 and 2, but I've never seen so many people spinning up their wheels. That was a resurface at that point. There was a big bump on the turn into turn 3 where people were really struggling. Outlap and the second and third laps, perhaps, when the tyre temps and therefore the tyre pressures weren't up to what they were expecting. The cars were clearly bottoming out there and people getting pitched sideways or hitting the inside wall, which happened as well across the weekend. There's just something there that wasn't quite right. Now, I love St. Pete's, and they had a big crowd there at the weekend. Not quite sure it was how many, the amount that they claimed, because there was nobody there on Thursday and Friday when I was watching the feeds from the early sessions. But nevertheless, they said they had a good crowd there, and it's very popular, and it's a lovely place to go. And in some respects, from turn sort of 9 onwards, it isn't turn 9 down to turn 1. It really isn't like your normal street circuits, because turn 10 is super quick, 11 and 12 through that chicane's fabulous. Then you've got the long right-handed hairpin back onto the airstrip and through turn 1 into turn 2. But that run through turn 2 and 3 this weekend was just, it was accident alley, wasn't it? And I
had 3 to 4 as well.
Well,
but it's the 2 bits that they've resurfaced, and
yeah, I know.
Coming up, Long Beach, which has also had bits, but not the whole track resurfaced. So we look forward to something very similar happening next month.
All right, that's the first hour tonight. Stay tuned. At Specutainment, if you want to get in touch, please.
Midweek Motorsport. And don't you dare switch off now, because the next hour's going to be even better.
We will be taking more of your tweets. Thanks to Bozzy Tatarovic as well. We've got some tweets from him. He's inside the paddock at IMSA and NASCAR on the MSR tyre pressure manipulation scandal that is just breaking today. And in the second hour tonight, Nick Damon's Formula One team by team from the first race of 2023 at Bahrain. It's not going to be short, so get yourself something to drink and settle in. Next week, we will not be on the air because we'll be at Sebring, and our next guest will be talking about Sebring. Delighted to say that joining us next is Johnny Morlam, our very own J-Mo, to talk about Sebring.
Midweek Motorsport on RadioLeMans.com.
Well, delighted to welcome Johnny Morlam back to our airwaves, and we're celebrating all things Sebring, so it's only right that we have a... See, I nearly called you a veteran there, J-Mo, of Sebring.
I'm officially old, just don't worry. don't worry.
Good to have your company, J-Mo, and Sebring. Let's talk in general terms. Did you enjoy going to Sebring in terms of a driver or from the history point of view?
Sebring for me has been a huge part of my racing career, my pro career. And when I first went there, I mean, I'm going to sound like a Philistine now, but I didn't know a lot about the history of it when I first raced there. And I did my first Sebring coincided with the first American Le Mans Series Sebring back in 1999.
Wow.
And it was actually only my second ever race in America, Daytona 1999, where we finished second in class and ninth overall, was my first ever race in America and my first ever 24-hour race in my life. And then Sebring was my second race in America. So I went there in a little bit of a daze. The first time I was actually getting paid to race was Daytona. So I still was all a real newbie and just wide-eyed and just taking everything in. And I remember going there and thinking, wow, this is a track, you know, and bumpy as anything. And I don't think it got any smoother.
It hasn't.
I went there.
That was with the mighty Porsche 911, the Carrera RSR. What a beast that was. And that would be for Reiser Callas.
It was with Reiser Callas, and I believe I drove with David Murray. I think it was maybe just me and him, then we did it as a two. In fact, most of the time I did Sebring, I did it as a two.
Yeah,
I know latterly now people seem to do it as a three.
Correct.
But certainly when we were doing it, Sebring was definitely just a two, and Daytona was a three. And then if you had other people listed in the car, it was to do because normally they were. In those days, they were the money guys, and they did maybe one lap, and then if you won it, they got a watch.
You have done it, I reckon, 10 times, and 12th is your worst finish. You've had 2 12ths. This is 12th in class. Your class finish average is 5th, 5.333, 5 and a third, but you can't be 5 and a third, so it's 5th. Does that surprise you?
That does actually really surprise me, because although I love Sebring, unlike Daytona, it's not necessarily been that kind to me. I've only won it once in class in the Ferrari in 07, which was one hell of a finish. When I think of Sebring, I don't necessarily think, and obviously for me, the overriding thing for Sebring is losing Bob Wallach. 2001, when I was his teammate in the Porsche factory car run at that time by Peterson Motorsports, and I'm fond of Sebring, but I've got bittersweet memories of Sebring. So to have a fifth is actually quite. I have been on the podium there a few times.
You have?
But not. But it's not been as kind to me as Daytona. I think. But nevertheless, I do love Sebring, and I think as a challenge on car and driver, probably the most challenging race I've ever done.
You've got 2 sixths, you've got a 4th, a 3rd, 2 seconds, and a win. And the 2 12ths is what takes you down that little bit. So you say, you've done all right there, mate. You've done all right.
It's funny, isn't it, how your memories play tricks with you, John? Yeah. Because I am thinking Sebring maybe hasn't been so kind to me, but actually, you reading me those stats, she has. So there you go.
What makes a good car and a good driver combination for Sebring, Johnny? I mean, it really is as bumpy as everybody talks about.
It is. And it's also quick. And so you need to have a car especially with the modern GTs now getting more and more with the reliant on aerodynamics as well. And even when I was there in GTs, you still had a reasonable amount of aerodynamics, and then obviously into the prototypes, you're relying heavily on aerodynamics. So you've got a situation where you want a stiff car to have a really good aero platform, but the track is just so bumpy. So the compromise trade-off, and there's always a compromise in setting up any race car, but the compromise trade-off between maintaining an aero platform and mechanical grip over the bumps and a ride quality, so you're not either banging the hell out of the car on the under tray, on the plank, or having it so high that you're losing significant amounts of aero. That trade-off at Sebring, in my memory anyway, has always been way bigger in terms of finding that sweet spot for the whole lap than any other circuit you go to, like Silverstone in comparison is like a billiard table, for example. I mean, even Daytona, that is relatively unbumpy compared to somewhere like Sebring. It's incredible. So we mentioned Bob Wallach earlier, John, and I remember going there with Bob, and I was fortunate enough to experience practice with him, and we did qualifying. It was only literally after we'd done everything, and just before the race, he unfortunately got killed. But so I got to observe the experience of Bob Wallach. And one of the things that he played with a lot at Sebring was the diff as well, which hadn't really occurred to me. And so we did a lot of diff work there, which I'd never really changed the diff at all. I mean, this was only 2 years into sort of my pro career, so I was still learning like a sponge. And he played a lot with that, and obviously a lot with the tuning between roll bars and dampers, because obviously a stiff roll bar on the bumps is not necessarily the way to go. So he would find a way of creating platform with springs and dampers, and then being able to run sometimes a relatively softer roll bar than you would expect a track with fast corners like that. But that was just for that Porsche at the time. Obviously, each car you have now, with torsion bars and third elements and things like that we didn't have back in 2001. It's very different, but it's still a difficult sweet spot to find.
He was called Brilliant Bob for a reason, wasn't he, Bob Wallach? And to be fair, we should tell anybody, in case you don't know, the tragic events of 2001. Bob, who was an inveterate cyclist, he would cycle hundreds of miles, was actually killed on his bicycle, leaving the track on the road down to Okeechobee on the way after a session, I think, Johnny, wasn't it? On one of the evenings in the back end of the week?
Yeah, it was. I know we'd qualified. I'd done qualifying. We'd qualified second or third in class, so he was pleased with that. And I remember he patted me on the back because he said to me, "You qualify this year because I'm way too old to qualify." Bearing in mind that he was then still older than I am now, and yet he could still hack it.
No way.
I believe he was 57. He said to me, patted me on the knee. We'd done some driver change practice. It had gone really well. And Bob was very much a Marmite kind of guy, but I absolutely adored him and had a huge amount of respect for him, which I think he sensed, which is probably why he liked me. We got on very well. Yeah. And I remember Mike Cotton saying to me after he died, coming and finding me in the paddock and saying to me, "Bob just spoke to me about you yesterday, and he was incredibly complimentary, and he was saying how he wanted to help me and help my career and everything else." And that meant so much to me, because obviously Bob never said that to me. He wasn't that kind of guy, but it meant a lot to me to know that actually he'd valued me as a teammate. But yeah, he patted me on the knee. He said, "I'm going to go off and do some cycling just to sort of, clear my head. And then when I come back, we'll do some more driver change practice." So it would have been the Friday, you're right. Yeah. And then he never came back. Yeah.
And there is a monument at the side of Highway 98 to Brilliant Bob Wallach.
Yeah.
And I would have known if I'd been asked, if I'd been put in a corner, that it was 2001. In some respects, it still seems much closer to that than that. And that weekend, obviously, is going to be etched on your mind for all the wrong reasons, JMO. But great memories of Brilliant Bob Wallach, and we should remember him for the time we had him and not for what we miss. Going back to Sebring's place in American racing culture, it has quite a lot of heritage in US and indeed in global racing, because it was part of the old World Sports Car Championship, because it was the GP Grand Prix Formula One championship venue in the States. And the beauty of it is, Jim, it hasn't changed that much in terms of the bits that you drive on.
Well, that's what I was just thinking as you were saying all of that. I was just thinking, how many circuits have I driven on? And I've driven on most circuits in the world, certainly most of the major ones. And where I can say that I drove pretty much the same layout as someone like a Fangio or a Sterling Moss or a Jack Brabham or someone like that. You know, so it is incredible, really, to think that. And even in the time that I went there, so I did my first one in 99 and I did my last one, I think you said it, in 2016, I think.
Yeah, 16.
So 17 years going there. And I can honestly say every time I turned up, I didn't feel, I mean, okay, you see gradual changes, which you don't really notice because they're happening year on year, but it hadn't really changed that much. And the track, apart from a couple of areas where they'd resurfaced it a little bit at the S's and everything else, but like turn 17 never changed. No. But the bumps definitely moved around a bit.
Just to catch you
not
out.
Necessarily in the same place.
No, exactly right. And some of them get worse and some of them get better because all of those big concrete blocks, for those that don't know, it was B17 training base back in the day. Let's go back to the race. You've got to talk about the atmosphere. It is a party atmosphere, isn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic. But that is actually something that I noticed calmed down a bit during the time that I was there. So the crowds were still there. But the craziness of the crowds when I first went there in 99, 2000, 2001 was just mind-blowing. And I remember in the early days, because I was like a sponge taking it all in, if someone said to me, oh, do you want to come out to turn 10, corner 10, which was like the traditional place where all the crazy people were. And I remember going out there and being served margaritas where the crushed ice was being made in a kart engine attached to a blender, and they would fire up this kart engine, which was incredibly noisy, and then just rev the hell out of it to do the crushed ice in the blender and then give me a margarita, which obviously I didn't drink too much of because I'm being,
of course,
professional and all that.
Your body is a temple.
But absolutely. But it was fantastic. And the scaffolding that they built up there to look over turn 10, to look down onto the track, and they had tree houses and they had all of that. And I think health and safety being what it is, which sort of came into effect in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, I think some of that got stopped over the years. So I have been out at turn 10 again when I broke down, literally coming out of the hairpin. I had to walk through turn 10 and they were just as friendly, but not maybe quite as raucous in the sort of noughties and sort of 2010s onwards as they were in 2000, I have to say. But the atmosphere, phenomenal.
It adds to the fact that it's not just a race, it's an event.
It's just incredible. And it is like, I think for the Americans, it's maybe a little bit like Le Mans is for the Europeans.
Yes.
It's a trip it's like a pilgrimage that they do every year.
Very
and
good point.
they meet the same people at Sebring that they probably don't see the rest of the year, but they see them every year at Sebring. They have the same pitch. They park their campers and tents in the same places. And it's like a family atmosphere. And it's like a week-long event. And we used to go out there and test on the Saturday, Sunday before the race, then have Monday, Tuesday off, and then be on track from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way through to the race on Saturday. So you were there for like 10 days almost. And in that way, it had a similar feel to Le Mans, where you go there for the test day and everything else. And so I agree with you. And it's a nice vibe. And the people there, the marshals, the way they run it's a good feeling. Although I have to say, racing in America is pretty much like that everywhere. But Sebring is particularly important.
I want to look towards the race this year, because for the last few years we've had a WEC race, a World Endurance Championship race, as well as the Mobil 1 12 Hours of Sebring, which effectively makes it probably one of, if not the biggest, sports car weekends. In terms of what the fans get to experience, that's a big weekend, and it has allowed us to compare and contrast the two different ways that we've seen up until relatively recently that the WEC and IMSA have gone about their racing, Johnny.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm only sad that I never got to experience that sort of super weekend, because we were due to race there when I was doing the WEC, obviously with Bonamy Grimes and Charlie Hollings in 2019 to 2020 season, which kind of rolled into 2021 almost. And of course, literally 2 days before we were due to fly to Sebring, or even the day before, they cancelled the race because of COVID back in March. I think it was the 10th of March or 16th of March, whenever it was, March 2020. So I never actually got to to go there and have that weekend with both of them at the same time, albeit we would have been in the WEC. But I remember talking to Oliver Jarvis. In fact, I remember, I was literally only talking to him a couple of weeks ago about it. And he was saying, because I was asking him how, I mean, and you'll know the answer to this, the way they set the paddocks up. Because I remember thinking, you know, Sebring, there's a lot of space, but they seemed to fill it just when it was a 12 hours. And and obviously with the pit lane, and of course the old pit lane, well, the traditional pit lane as I know it, coming in onto the right after turn 17, which, by the way, what a pit lane entry that is to get wrong, because it's so, when you go tight at 17 and you keep it tight after the bridge, it's so bumpy there. I cannot tell you that you can actually lose the car even at sort of 7 or 8 tenths if you held it too tight there. So you kind of have to drift a little bit and then come diving into the pit lane, which if you've got a prototype behind you deciding to come in at the same time can be a little bit careful. But anyway, and then you've got with the WEC, they run the pit lane entry coming in after the S's, don't they? Or
correct,
during
just
the
before
S's,
turn
and then
16.
they come out,
yeah.
and then they come out at 17.
Halfway down the back straight.
And he was saying when you're doing both championships as he did last year, you got to really have your wits about you to remember to come in the right pit lane.
Now, we've got a whole loads of new cars there this year, Johnny, and I know you keep across all this stuff. Some of which, Peugeot, in fact, have not tested at Sebring. Does that surprise you that they've decided that the first time they're going to put that car, that 9X8, out on the track will be the prologue, which comes up the weekend before the race?
That does surprise me, and I think they're in for a shock, because for me, I think that the situation is Sebring. I mean, look at what Audi used to do. They used to go out and live there, didn't they? In terms of test and development their car for Le Mans. And they'd and even I remember a year when Audi didn't race at Sebring, and you'll know the year, I can't remember the year, but they didn't race at Sebring that year with their new car. But they then, they went to Sebring, so they were there, they didn't race, and then they stayed on afterwards and tested for 2, 3, 4 days afterwards, because for them, that was worth it in terms of learning the car, putting the car through its paces, and most important of all, reliability testing. Yeah. So I'll be fascinated, and I think this is going to be an amazing weekend because, as you know, it's a very exciting era in sports cars that we're heading into in terms of managing to get, like it was when I first started racing in America, where the cars racing at Le Mans are the same cars are racing in America, and there's a crossover, and yet you're going to have the same class of cars, you're going to have hypercars and LMDHs racing on the same track at the same time, but not in the same race. And it's going to be fascinating to me to see the relevant times now, because you really can compare apples to apples and see how the teams and different manufacturers are sort of competing against each other at this early stage in their development. And then come Le Mans, obviously, some of them will have developed their car a lot, some of them maybe not, given on budgets and everything else. And it's just going to be really fascinating, because this is going to be the first time you're going to be able to see everything on track at the same time since this new class came into effect this year.
I want to ask you, you still running, of course, still running your business, Red River Sport, and therefore still with clients that you've been guiding their way through various types of motorsport, circuit and rallying as well. You've branched off into in the last couple of three years. I want to ask you a couple of questions about where endurance racing and GT racing in particular is going. We're going to lose the GTE cars, the mighty Le Mans GTEs. This year is the last year for them at Le Mans, to be replaced by GT3s.
Well, in my opinion, it's certainly not a bad change. GTEs, very sophisticated cars, didn't have ABS, but very, very sophisticated traction control systems, but tricky cars for amateurs to drive absolutely on the limit. And so that's why you had really top-level amateurs doing the WEC, but probably only had 7 or 8 of them, you know, like the Ben Keatings of this world, Paul Dallalanas, Bonamy Grimes was working his way into that group. Those kind of drivers, if they were golfers, I say they're almost playing off a zero handicap. You know what I mean? It's like
good.
They're very, very high-level drivers, even though they're amateurs. GT3, obviously a little bit more user-friendly. That's what it was introduced for in the first place. Has ABS, which is a huge assist, especially for gentlemen and amateur drivers. And I think also, if you look at where the number of amateur drivers that are racing in GT3s currently across other different series in Europe and obviously in IMSA as well, I think it's only good and only kind of pushes that door to go to Le Mans slightly more open. The fact that they're thinking, well, this car that I'm racing now, this GT3, I can then go and race that at Le Mans.
Yeah.
It was always going to happen, John. GT3 was always going to end up at Le Mans. The only thing, and as far as costs go, GTE was very, very expensive. GT3 is also very expensive, but not quite in the ballpark of GTE. But probably now with GT3 going to Le Mans and all the rest of it, I think costs will probably start escalating. So after a while, there won't be any difference in costs between doing it in a GT3 car and a GTE car. So that's the only thing. But that's a by the by. In terms of allowing access to amateur drivers to race at Le Mans, it's certainly not a bad move. And in my opinion, a reasonably good one.
Right. On the other side of that, young professionals coming through have traditionally gone into LMP2. Now that's going as well and not being replaced.
See, that is a huge, on the other side of the coin, that's a huge blow, because single-seater guys doing F2 or whatever who come out, realise that F1's not going to happen for them and want to establish themselves as professional sports car drivers, we're always going to go and gravitate towards P2 cars, because P2, even though it's been slowed down a little bit because of the introduction of hypercar and LMDH, is still the modern LMP2s are incredibly sophisticated cars. Let's not forget, they're doing 3-minute 25s and quicker around Le Mans, which is where LMP1 was not that long ago. So they're incredibly fast, incredibly sophisticated, perfect for a sort of young 20-year-old silver driver to come into, learn his trade, prove his worth, and then, as you say, get picked up and go into a hypercar or manufacturer at that level. Whereas driving a GT car is a different skill set. So for a single-seater driver to get into a GT car, even though any good driver can adapt to it, initially they're going to struggle. So they're going to have to find a way to gain experience in a GT car before they go and then try out in GT cars in order to get into a manufacturer program in a GT situation. So it's a huge blow for them, because the opportunities, you can't argue against it. They're going to be reduced opportunities for them. And I think that is a shame. And I don't understand. I mean, you could look at P3, but to be honest, P3's too low.
Correct.
It's too low. It's too, as good as those cars are for gentlemen and amateur drivers, for an up and coming fast kid straight out of Formula 2, that's not a good enough platform to prove his worth.
Currently, I think we'll still see LMP2 in ELMS and probably the Asian Le Mans Series as the top category, but without the opportunity to go at Le Mans, IMSA is still making their mind up about it.
Have you heard, because I've heard rumours that P3 has been going to be taken out of the big show in IMSA, similar to what they did with Prototype Challenge a few years ago. I personally, from my point of view, that's not great, because that doesn't allow me to bring in my kind of drivers at that level. But I think if they're going to take P3 and P2 out, I think that's a huge mistake, because you're falling back down into the trap, and we're going through a boom of manufacturers getting involved in sports cars, but it's a cycle, and you're going to get to a point maybe 5 years from now, maybe 8 years from now, where the manufacturers pull out, because they always do. They come and go, and then you're going to be left with a situation like they did a few years ago in 2008, where they're desperately trying to attract amateurs back into the sport. So in my opinion, taking P2 out and not catering to your amateur drivers that are in that is the wrong thing to do.
I want to finish off with a quick word about 2007 at Sebring. We started at Sebring. Let's finish at Sebring. Mika Salo, Jamie Melo and Johnny Morlam, our very own JMO, in a Ferrari 430 GT, completed 330 laps with Risi Competizione and Giuseppe's team, and won what was then GT2 12th place overall. Not actually your best overall finish. Your best overall finish was in 2005 when you finished 8th in the Asemco Motorsport Celine S7R, but that was only good enough for 4th in GT1 in that year.
That was a competitive year with the Corvettes, Astons, Lamborghini, Celine. I'd forgotten about that.
Tell me about 2007. Mika Salo and Jamie Melo, interesting teammates. Tell me about that lovely, I think one of the best looking Ferrari GT cars of, let's call it the modern era. The 430, the proportions of it, I loved it. It was a good race car as well, Jimo.
It was fantastic. And I'd recently come out of, I was sort of learnt my trade and moved into the professional ranks in GT in a Porsche. And so getting into the Ferrari situation and being chosen to drive alongside effectively what was a factory car then, because let's not forget, Risi Competizione back then was kind of like AF Corsa now. Obviously, he didn't have quite the empire that AF Corsa have grown into, but in terms of who Ferrari went to support with their factory support in America and at Le Mans, because we raced at Le Mans as well, together, was the Risi team. So effectively driving with Jamie and Mika, factory drivers, in a factory supported or effectively a factory car was fantastic, especially with it being Ferrari. That film, the Ferrari versus Ford, it was fantastic to watch that and feel like, I'd been involved in a little bit of the history of Ferrari at Le Mans. But you keep on saying, you'll win at Sebring, but I have to say it was Jamie Mello's win at Sebring because without Jamie Mello in the car at the end, I don't believe that we would have won Sebring. How he did what he did, and what people don't ever mention, because obviously your Bergmeister in the Porsche was catching him literally about 1.5 to 2 seconds a lap.
Yeah.
And Jamie at the very end, we'd been having a few problems. We were quickest by a mile and we should have won that comfortably, but we were having problems that the engine wouldn't start. It was taking 30 seconds to start the engine up at the pit stops.
Wow.
And so we were losing 30 seconds every pit stop for the last sort of 3 or 4 pit stops, which dropped us back into the clutches of the Porsche. Because of that, we weren't changing tyres at stops, and we didn't have a chance also we were running really low on front brakes. And if you look at the video, it's difficult to tell, but there are sparks coming out of his front, because at the end, for the last 2 or 3 laps, Jamie was on metal to metal on the brakes. And that made it, and that made it incredibly difficult. And that's why he was running on at the hairpin, and they were going, he's succumbing to the pressure, but he wasn't. He was absolutely giving it everything he had.
And the other thing, Jimo, was that you were getting caught. Your car was getting caught by the leader, but it didn't pass you. So we had
a whole nother lap.
You had an extra lap. Time had expired. The leaders had gone across the line and won checkered flag race. And I remember calling this going, the race is not over in in GT2 because we've still got an extra. They were right behind you, and if only they'd gone by, that would have been it. But as you said, Bergmeister in the Porsche was catching. It was elbows out driving, wasn't it, JMO?
It was, and Jorg, understandably, if you lose, and Jorg Bergmeister, he had it. He got past Jamie going on the straight, going down into 17. And he had it, and all he had to do was turn in a little bit late, keep Jamie on his outside, and then turn in a little bit late and position himself so that Jamie couldn't do the cutback on him. Yep. But he didn't do that. I think he got in front. It's difficult at night, to be fair, because you're not aware. You just see really bright lights, and you're not sure if he's on the left or the right. It makes it a lot harder. But he didn't position himself right going down into 17. I think he kind of relaxed and thought he had it done. And then Jamie somehow managed to get the thing, do a cutback. And then, yes, he did get in with his left front into the right rear ever so slightly of Bergmeister, but it wasn't a massive hit. It was just literally, he just rubbed him. And I think that was enough on the bumps to get Jorg to just have to come out the throttle a fraction. And then he just got a run on him going to the line. And Marty Kaufman, who was race director at the time, and I loved Marty, bless his heart. But the one thing about Marty was he was very, very hard, but very, very fair.
Correct.
And me and Mika didn't know. We hadn't seen any of this. So I recommend anyone to go and watch it on YouTube, because me and Mika Sala are on the pit wall, biting our fingernails, not knowing any of this is happening, just waiting to see which car comes across the line first. And we couldn't believe it when we saw it was Jamie. And we weren't even sure with the headlights until they went past us who was in front. But Marty looked at it and decided that it was just racing. And it was a little bit of rubbing, a little bit of rubbing is racing. If that happened in the race, no one would even say anything.
Yeah.
It was just because it was the last corner
to the line.
of the last lap, and it meant that we won the race, or Jamie won the race.
Well, the record books are different because you all pitched in, Mika Salo, Jamie Miller, and Johnny Morlam, JMO, as we like to call him, in 2007. Johnny, thank you very much for joining us and some great reminiscences about Sebring.
Thank you so much, John. Have a brilliant time out there, and I hope it's a fantastic race. I'm sure it will be, both races.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, JMO. Thank you, mate. We'll get you back on again sooner rather than later. Johnny Morlam joining us tonight here on Midweek Motorsport. Thank you for all of the very nice things that you've said about JMO and me having a chat. It is all. Listen, I could talk to JMO for absolutely hours, and if you've ever heard our big interviews, or our long ones with them, you'll know that we have done in the past. This weekend we'll have some coverage for you from the WEC Prologue with a couple of shows with some interviews, and then we'll start next Wednesday with our race week coverage for the running of the Sebring 12 hours, the Mobile One Sebring, the Mobile One 12 hours of Sebring, and the WEC 1,000 miles. And we'll have every session of the WEC, the only broadcaster to have that and to be able to promise that live next week. And it's all free on RS1 and IMSA Radio on RS2. Tim Gray.
Well, also next week, Paul Tarsi's in Florida. And next week's Historic Racing News is a special from the Amelia Island Concourse, which took place at the weekend.
Where are we going to fit that in?
That's in its usual slot, 10 p.m. on RS1 next Wednesday, the 15th of March. Sooner
so
than
we're
that,
all done by then, are we?
Yes, because WC Free Practice is due to finish about 20 minutes before that.
Yes.
And I think that as it's practice session, the clock will keep running in the event of a red flag, so it won't overrun.
You said that rather more confidently.
I'm very confident in the race control of the FIA WEC. Tomorrow night at 8, it's the Simcast. Matt Hunter, not broadcasting live from Crofts, so he will not be on this week's
Crufts,
show.
Not Croft, by the way.
Correct.
Crofts.
Oh,
yes,
they should hold Crofts at
Crofts at Croft. Lovely bit of alliteration.
They could use that a bit round the back to do the flyball outdoors.
It's more than flyball, and you know it. Crufts is more than just the fun bits. It's a very serious matter.
It is
You've
a very
worked on
serious
Crufts
matter,
Radio before.
and there's a lot of things being sold as well.
Yes, I loved working on Crufts FM. It was one of my favourite things to do. Anyway, moving on.
Tomorrow night at 8, the Simcast will instead be, because Stephen's also away, be presented by Ben and Lewis. And they will be talking about some new content for iRacing, which has been announced. So that's tomorrow night at 8 here on RS1. Very quickly, bit more sports car news, because Simon Pagenaud is going to Le Mans for the first time in 12 years. He's joining up with Cool Racing to replace Jose Maria Lopez, who is in their ELMS team, but has another commitment on the Le Mans weekend, and therefore isn't able to share his car with Vlad Lomko and Rashad de Garous.
Quickly, a couple of tweets on the Maya Shank Racing rules issue.
Transgression.
Transgression, that was the word I was looking for, thank you. The rule in question, says Bozzy Tatrovic, is, and if you don't follow Bozzy, and he is Bozzy, at Bozzy, B-O-Z-I, Tatarovic, which is T-A-T-A-R-E-V-I-C. He's brilliant. The rule in question here is 366. It sets out operational requirements for pressures and cambers. They want teams to operate within a certain set of pressures. This is IMSA and Michelin. And if you violate that, you get penalised. Drive-throughs and potential disqualification for multiple issues. And he says teams will typically run their pressures as close to the edge as possible, because the lower your pressures, the better performance you get out of a tyre. You'll have more grip throughout the stint. Now, IMSA and Michelin don't want you to do this because they've calculated the minimum pressures that they believe will can be sustained by the tyres safely. So they instituted this rule, and that they actively monitor tyre pressures through the waste. Teams will get a warning the first time, then a drive-through the second time, and they grow for each subsequent violation. The reason the infraction wasn't found during the race is that we're polishing the access subsection of the rule, which related to how the tyre pressure data is transferred, and in this case it seems to have been manipulated. Based, says Bozzy, on his understanding of the rule, it's like that an offset was added to the data being reported from the car, which result in IMSA and Michelin seeing larger number for the tyre pressure than was actually on the car. And by the way, This is about a hot tyre pressure when the car is on the track. The stabilised pressure reading is calculated from the tyre pressure sensor on the car as the average hot pressure over one full lap when the lap-to-lap pressure variation is less than 2%. Of the tyre pressure. So there you go. That's the full explanation. And I have tweeted the IMSA. If you go to Aspect you will see that I have tweeted the link to the IMSA ruling on that, which has all the details. Aspect if you want to get in touch. Series 18, Episode 9. Tim Gray.
Ralph Boschung won the sprint race. Theo Pourchaire won the feature race. But Nick Damon, which other F2 driver is going to be racing for AlphaTauri in Formula One next season, apparently?
Oh, I don't know. Who is it going to be?
Zane Maloney, apparently.
Really?
Yes.
He got a third, didn't he?
He did all right, in fairness. He did all right.
He's Barbadian, isn't he?
He is from Barbados, yes.
Barbados, yeah.
A country that's usually associated with rallying, of course.
And he has
Which
Bushy.
you hate.
He's sponsored. He's sponsored by Bushy Park, or at least he carries the Bushy Park logo on the side. For me, at the weekend, given how Theo did very, very well in everything that he did, for me, he was the driver of the weekend. Does Formula 2 risk, Tim, this year just becoming a Porsche Air Cup? Sorry, I had to. Anyway.
Could you get your coat, please?
All right, I'm off. I'll leave you now.
Before you do leave, do you still think you can justify Nick de Vries's place in Formula One?
That isn't the question I'd ask him. The question I'd ask John is whether he still thinks that Lance Stroll's rubbish.
I have to say that I was very impressed with the large-headed man, Lance Stroll, driving with 2 injured wrists and a broken toe, which had a comedy Desperate Dan Bino bandage on it when they did that for social media, which I thought was brilliant. He finished 6th, didn't he, in the end? I haven't got the results up because I was back to normal at the weekend and actually fell asleep after lunch and missed some of the race. But I think
you should delay your lunches.
No, Sunday lunch is listen. Do you honestly think I'm going to ask the responsible adult to delay a lunch? No. Not at all. I thought he did very well considering his ailments and the fact that, let's be fair, he was only racing there because he got a second chance to do his extraction test. Which, look, you can look at that 2 ways. You can say, why was he given a second chance? He couldn't do it the first time, therefore he shouldn't have been racing. Or, hey, well done to him for driving so injured he couldn't get out of the car in the requisite amount of time.
You haven't answered my question about Nick de Vries.
Did he beat his teammate?
No.
Oh, well, it's the first race. Maybe he'll get better.
He barely beat anyone. He beat both Hasses because they were on some ridiculous strategy that was never going to mean anything other than them going backwards. But Nick's going to tell us all that because it's time for Nick Damon's team-by-team review of the Bahrain Grand Prix.
And for that, we'll need Nick Damon, our Formula One correspondent.
Hurrah! Hooroo! It started finally after 3 months. We've got a new season and it's already over.
As usual, we start at the back in team by team, and that means McLaren.
Yes. McLaren have been playing down their chances from the moment of the launch, saying that they're not going to do very well at the start of the season, and they've managed to prove that by not doing very well in testing and now not doing very well in the first race. They are of the opinion that they initially went the wrong way with the development of this car, and they found what they'd done wrong and found a much better direction sort of November time. And having found it in November time, they now think they can bring out a significantly revised and much better car for his new direction in time for the Baku race in 8 weeks' time. So that's their statement. They knew they did it wrong. They got it wrong. Their car's rubbish, and therefore they have a new car. The only problem was that the problems that actually afflicted the car outside of its slowness was absolutely rubbish reliability. Piastri had to stop quite early on. I think was it a hydraulic problem? I know he stopped early
It was
on,
an
about
electrical
15 laps
problem.
in. Electrical hydraulics are all the same, isn't it? It's always ones you can't find. So he had an electrical issue. He stopped, having been okay during the rest of the weekend for a rookie. Lando Norris had a good qualifying. Admittedly, he was relatively lucky to get out of Q the first qualifying because he always had the same time as Logan Sargent. He did better with the car than it could possibly expected. He put in some good lap times. The problem was he made 117 pit stops. As the team had to keep refilling the air of his pneumatic system. So he stopped, I think he stopped 5 times. He stopped so often, he ended up running like tyres that no one else had run because they were the ones they had left. He did actually go for the fastest lap at the end and got nowhere near it because actually the car is really quite slow. And those times where you saw him hanging onto the back, I think it was the back of the Sainz and Hamilton battle. The only reason to do that is he had far newer tyres at that point. But effectively, that car's rubbish. They know it's rubbish. They're telling you it's rubbish, and they are hoping it's going to be better by Baku. It was interesting. There was an odd amount of schadenfreude from the Australians, which would have been made sense because they think, lucky old Danny Ricciardo being paid £18 million not to be in the car, $18 million not to be in the car. If it hadn't been for that person who is in the car is another Australian, which kind of makes you think, well, kind of like shooting yourselves nationally in the foot anyway. But there we go. That was planned rubbish.
Also suffering from poor reliability, Ferrari.
Yes, in the not my surprise phase. Charles Leclerc had some pace over one lap, had the car in second, and then decided not to take his second run in qualifying to save a set of new tyres for the start of the race. Those new tyres worked very well. He splurged past Sergio Perez. He ran second, and then he just ran out of tyres as the degradation, which was significantly worse than the Red Bulls, caught up with him and enabled the Red Bull to run 2 runs of soft, and through went Perez. He was then trundling around in third quite happily, and then he had a engine failure. The engine problem was actually an electrical problem. It's an energy store, which was interesting. The same problem they had with the car in Parc Fermé. They already replaced it once, so they are already in serious trouble for picking up a penalty after one race, which is pretty much new in Ferrari when they've used all their parts already. Carlos Sainz was there or thereabouts to Leclerc, not on a lap. In the run, he was also slightly off, much like last season, slightly slower, came in fourth, and kind of Ferrari, so over one lap, they're not too far away from Red Bull, but over a run, they're a long way
away. The other car that couldn't get 2 cars to the finish was Alpine.
Yes, Alpine didn't bother doing any qualifying simulations during testing, and then complained they hadn't done any qualifying test sessions during simulations during testing, because Pierre Gasly said, "Well, we haven't taken it right at the edge before. It's not quite how I expected it to be." I'm thinking, well, that was your choice, actually. Interesting race, really, because Esteban Ocon qualified quite well and had a terrible race, and Pierre Gasly qualified quite badly and had a very good race. We'll start with Ocon. Ocon went on "It's a Celebrity, I'm going to get as many penalties as I possibly can" championship, as he started off by being out of his grid position, picked up a 5-second stop penalty where effectively you have to stop for 5 seconds before they can touch the car. Unfortunately, they touched the car for 4.6 seconds in the pit, so he then got 10 seconds for that, and then he sped in the pit lane as he exited that in a fit of peak, had another couple of penalties, and then retired the car. Obviously, there was nothing wrong with the car, but there was no point trundling around at that point. He was so far behind. On the flip side, Gasly, who completely loused up qualifying, he'd blown his first run with track limits and then got traffic on his second run, was very well served by his team, who got him early for every set of pit stops, and every set of pit stops he moved slowly up the field just by doing the undercut, that terrible word, and he even picked up an extra position towards the end when they did put him in for tyres, even doing that late virtual safety car. That's where he picked up 9th place and a couple of points.
I think Ocon, if he had carried on, could have finished just behind Magnussen, but
But what's the point?
Because Magnussen was 13th.
Save the engine.
On to him shortly.
Save the engine for 16 laps. Save the engine.
And talk about Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, another good start from Valtteri Bottas. I mean, by good start, I mean both the season and the race. Bottas and Zhou looked very, very similar, really, during the Friday and the Saturday practices, and then it just came again, that experience and that talent, and the raw sort of one-lap pace talent that Bottas has already had came to the fore, and he put in a good qualifying position, and he used that good qualifying position to get a good race position. He then was quite intelligent. He didn't race people he didn't need to race, and he was always looking to be the best of the rest. Now, we seem to have 4 teams who can lock out the top 8 positions. Lucky one of them broke down, so he picked up 8. So a great performance by Bottas. Joe ended up getting the fastest lap. He actually did come in to pick up the fast lap at the end by nearly a second. The reason being apparently is because prior to that it was Pierre Gasly who had it. Oddly, the guys at the front had all done different tyre strategies, and so they weren't up for these fastest laps. And the team said the reason they put Joe in to get that fastest lap was just take it away from Alpine, so they have one less point. The idea being that there could be a close battle in Alfa Romeo and Alpine at the back end of the season. I think it's unlikely. I think Alpine will get their act together and move away from Alfa Romeo relatively easily. But as it is, Alfa Romeo better start to the season.
With double number of points of Alpine. We move on to Haas.
Yeah. Well, Nico Hülkenberg looked really good. Looked like he hadn't been away, qualified really well. Unfortunately, I think at turn 4, he got involved in a kerfuffle and lost the most important part of his front wing. That gave the car understeer, that ate the tyres. Then completely, unfathomably, Haas didn't replace the wing at the first pit stop. They waited the second pit stop to do it, which is just ridiculous. So the car was hobbled for most of the race. Kevin Magnussen having one of the days when it just didn't look really on there. Though in the end, he actually managed to finish ahead of Hülkenberg because of these problems. But the fact is that the car seems to be okay for one lap, certainly with the German driving. Race pace doesn't look anything special. I mean, there's a lot of teams really at the moment who are still discovering their race pace, and Bahrain is a very special circuit. It's very different from the others in demands it puts in the car. But I think a lot of the early optimism Haas might have had maybe slightly beaten out of them by this result.
Magnussen did soft, hard, hard. Do you think he should have done soft, hard, soft, or did they have the same issue as the Ferraris with tyre? Yes, Ferraris with tyre wear.
Everyone had issues with everyone was having to play safe with tyre wear apart from Red Bull, and that's just a pure downforce thing. So no, I don't think they would have done much good anyway. Really, I think he was a long way behind Logan Sargent in 12th. As Magnussen, he wasn't really even in the running for that.
We move on to AlphaTauri.
Yeah, now you've got a down on Nick De Vries for some reason. I don't think he did particularly well, but I don't think he did particularly badly either. Tsunoda was very good. Tsunoda qualified very, very well, and he was completely unnoticed by the TV people. But you looked at him, suddenly he was up there at 8th on the first runs, and this is a car that really isn't very good. It's very understeery, so Tsunoda can take a lot of credit from that. Unfortunately, he fell back during the race. And actually, Nick, prior to that last virtual safety car, De Vries was ahead of Tsunoda, but Tsunoda picked up the stop, got the fresh tyres, and was able to drive past Nick, as were a number of the cars who did stop at that last stop again, because it's such a heavy tyre degradation circuit. So, Tsunoda was definitely better on Saturday. I think on Sunday the jury's out about who was better or who was worse, but the AlphaTauri is not a very good car, and that's more of a worry, I think, than De Vries being slightly under par on Saturday.
Williams. We're into the top half of the league now here,
I know. I think just as everyone, you could probably say that McLaren were unhappy, and Ferrari were unhappy, and Alpine, I think, were unhappy as well. And AlphaTauri definitely unhappy, and Haas were unhappy. I think Williams are definitely very chuffed because they have, in theory, the slowest car on the grid. However, it was both of them, both Sargent and Albon, executed brilliantly and came back with a 10th and 12th. Now, there's no reward for Logan because you don't get anything for 12. But I think a part of people going, because he was the rookie everyone was going, I'm not so sure about, but he put in a great weekend. Now, obviously, this is a less of a test for any of the rookies, or all 3 of the rookies, the next race in Saudi, because all the rookies had a day and a half of testing, and it was on the F2. Bahrain's on the F2 circuit as well, so they're going to go to the tracks and they're not going to know Saudi, so it's going to be a much bigger test for these 3 guys to see how they go at Saudi than here, because where they had so many laps already in, because they've got to learn a track and set the car up and work what's going on. So that's more interesting. But given that proviso, Sargent did well, kept his nose clean, didn't damage the car. Alex Albon, you get a track where top speed is important, which it is here, and the slippery Williams gives him enough advantage to not be overtaken on a DRS. He can hold the cars back with his talent and car positioning in the rest of the circuit. So he did really, really well to get a point. Gasly got in the end on fresher tyres. But yeah, I think Williams will be pleased with this result because it gets them off the mark, and they're probably will give them a feeling that they can pick up a few more small point scores here and there. And small point scores are going to be really important for these other teams, because if you look at realistically, on the evidence here, the top 8 places are going to be taken by 4 teams, because again, there was that big gap, and then the possibly the next team that might come take that is Alpine. So there's now 5 other teams who theoretically aren't going to get any points unless someone breaks down. So oddly, 1s and 2s are maybe even more important this year than they have ever been before.
We move on to Mercedes.
Well, yes. I mean, honestly, they started off. I don't know. Start Mercedes. They were. You go out to testing, good first day, bad second day, reasonably good third day, thinking they were at worst as far off, still off Red Bull, but not as far as Hawk. They had Friday, thought this is awful. By Saturday, they'd effectively were almost slashing their wrists in despair. They came off about 6/10 behind. Toto Wolff was saying this concept's completely wrong. We've got to change it on. We were wrong to go with the zero side. Probably should have changed tack entirely. The race happened and they had much more severe tyre degradation than the other 3 teams. Well, actually probably similar to Ferrari, but Ferrari had a bit more straight basic pace. So they got gobbled up by the Aston Martins on tyre wear and racecraft. Hamilton qualified a couple of hundredths behind Russell, which I think actually ended up being an advantage because he got onto the cleaner side of the grid. Got a much better start than George, despite George pretending he was fast. It was obvious George had a bit worse tyre wear, and then Hamilton's racecraft, which is still better than probably everyone apart from Alonso, was enabling him to maximise the result, and 5th place was the maximum result they could get. You kind of think if Lance Stroll had been fully fit, then the maximum they could have got was 6th. But now it's all like, oh, this is disaster. There's nothing we can do. The revisions they're bringing out for Imola are an improvement on the car they currently have, and they're now saying they need to go to a completely different concept. George Russell is saying of Red Bull can win every race, and we should just discard this entire season. Lewis Hamilton saying the team didn't listen to me when they said what should happen. So it's all a bit of disarray, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel. Now, again, the fact is that Bahrain is a very different circuit from the other circuits. It's very rear limited. It's very heavy tyre wear. So people who could keep their rear tyres in good shape, and that will normally be cars that got a lot of downforce. So Red Bulls did very well. The Aston Martins did very well. Will do better than all the rest of the teams. Now, the Mercedes is no worse than the Ferrari or the rest of the cars as far as tyre wear is concerned, but they aren't as good as Aston Martin or Red Bull, and that was the key deciding factor here. It's the most rear limited circuit on the season. But the interesting thing is, the one really good thing about last year's car was it's really easy on its tyres. So had they actually managed to lose the only good thing about the car and pick up no new things, I mean, we're a couple of races away from really deciding that. We have a sampling factor of 1, and it's a circuit that isn't like any other, but it's not looking particularly good for Mercedes, and it's not looking particularly good for those who think that Lewis Hamilton should win an 8th championship, and all those who think that George Russell should be able to win at the field. It doesn't look like they're going to be doing it anytime soon.
Aston Martin.
Well, Aston Martin were very, very, very quick in the test, and we all thought it was well done. Then you're at least you're faster than Alpine, and it's But obviously, once everyone brings their bits and bobs to the first race, then you'll be nowhere near anyone else. Well, they were. Alonso obviously loves a nice fighty car, and he was able to do something with it. He was doing his normal PR on the radio. He did want to try and find out who'd rammed him on the first lap. That was Lance Stroll, so they wouldn't tell him that. Lance was back to his swashbuckling best. He did put in a really good performance. Unfortunately, he made a poor start and got kind of squeezed out going up the hill. If he hadn't done that, then he would have almost certainly have been much further up. He got stuck behind Lewis for a long period of the first stint, and he was definitely losing time. In the end, he maximised his result because he wasn't going to beat Sergio and he wasn't going to beat Max, but he might have had a battle with Charles, but obviously Charles had broken down. So he did get the maximum result available, not necessarily conventional time, which perhaps was good because it gave the small amount of interest in the whole race, was seeing what Fernando could do. Lance Stroll, we found out the extent of his injuries, that 6th place is incredibly it's really a great achievement by Lance. He didn't have any testing, which immediately puts in the back. Everyone else had a day and a half at least around that track, which is 150, 200 laps they've been doing. They knew what they're doing. They knew the new cars. They'd done it in the balance up, and Lance didn't even get much of Friday practice either. So to turn that performance where he finished half a minute behind his teammate, but he obviously had different traffic. His best possible result would have been getting past Lewis, but he was a bit far behind at the beginning, and obviously he very nearly did take out Alonso at the start, but never mind. But that's Lance's best drive by a country mile, and proves again people who do just sometimes just because you're the owner's son doesn't mean you're not any good. And he showed a lot of guts, a lot of grit, and with a good car, he piloted it well. So well done, Lance.
And we move on to Ferrari. No, we don't, because we've done Ferrari.
No, we don't.
We move on to Red Bull.
Red Bull have got the fastest car with the most downforce and the best tyre deg, which is well done them. And, hopefully they've done it fairly. And it was a walk in the park. They won by, 40 seconds. They could have won by 2 minutes they wanted to. They were just winding everything back. Verstappen was that little bit better than Sergio Perez would expect, a couple of tenths, but both in qualifying and the race. Very easy 1-2. Perez didn't make a great start and had to actually overtake Leclerc, but that was never any in doubt. And so we're left with a situation now where, despite everyone trying to put a positive spin on it, it is pretty obvious who the world champion this year is going to be, and it's pretty obvious who the world champion constructors is going to be, because you don't overcome the deficits that the other teams have to Red Bull. Yes, I'm not saying I'm not in with George Russell. They're not win every race. It never happens, but they're going to be the favourites every race. And for those, and it is an unfortunate situation. Now, of course, we've been in this situation before, but interestingly, I don't think we've been in it quite so bad. People talk about the domination of Mercedes back through the hybrid era. Well, if you look at the factors if you look at 14, 15, 16, 17 and 18, the only time it was kind of like really obvious who was going to win was 2015. In 14 and 16, there was a monumental battle between teammates, between Rosberg and Hamilton. There isn't going to be a battle between teammates here. Verstappen's so much better than Perez. In 15, Hamilton won quite easily. And don't forget, in 17 and 18, Ferrari actually had the fastest car. It was just Ferrari who lost it. It wasn't anything else than that. And we had no idea how the championship was going to go until at least after the summer break. It was up for grabs until then, not really decided after one race. Admittedly, in 19 and 20, it was pretty obvious we were going to have a Mercedes win. So we had a few of these bad years, but not as many people think we've had. The problem is you're going to get into we're having a bit of a point of unintended consequences. And the reason I say that is because we've changed the rules to try and even things up, but it hasn't worked. And we've got a gulf between teams because one team's done a really good job. Now, admittedly, they spent too much money, but they've done a really good job. Now, if you think about how Ferrari caught Mercedes up between 16, 17 and 18, now you could say they had a little bit of a dodgy engine, fair enough. But basically, they spent as much money as possible to do it. And we now don't have that. Because of the cost cap, you can't invest to try and catch up. So you've now got teams trying to catch up a massive lead with one arm behind their back. Because let's be honest, if Mercedes had unlimited money, they'd be developing both concepts, or three concepts, or four concepts. They'd be doing everything they could do because they could throw cash at the problem. Can't do that. So they are stymied and stuck, and these teams are all stuck with these basic cars. If they've, either they've made a mistake where they've done it good, or they know what they're going to fix. The engines are frozen. There's so little they can do that, unfortunately, in locking in these regulations financially, if you can lock in an advantage. Now, this is nothing against Red Bull. Well done. They've done a great job. Nothing against Adrian Newey. But if you, as Formula One, want a competitive championship, sometimes what you think is going to produce a competitive championship, which is everyone going to spend X pounds or X dollars, can have the opposite effect. And again, this is why you shouldn't have a cost cap in F1 and you shouldn't have engine. People should be able to spend their way out of trouble. Why ever not? But, I'm an outlier here. But we are, it's one race down. And it's not very trendy to do this. But I'm telling you right now, Max Verstappen's winning the World Championship and Red Bull are winning the Constructors. We'll have a couple of good races. But, a lot of the time it's going to be 1-2s.
John?
Nick, can I? Thanks, Tim. Can I ask a question, Nick? And it's a pretty simple question, and it probably requires a far more detailed answer than we've got time for. As we're about
30
a minute.
seconds, Nick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we started a tiny bit late, so we can.
That's why I say you've got 30 seconds and not that we're already out of time.
So, Red Bull, who, by everybody's understanding, brought the regulations and were penalised for that by having to take less CFD and less wind tunnel time, which Christian Horner said would cost them the championship this year. How much further up the field would they be if they hadn't have had that, or has it made no difference to them at all?
It's made no difference to start the season, and now they are this far ahead. They don't need to spend many minutes developing this year's car. So the penalty would have no effect whatsoever.
So it was a pointless penalty for them breaking the rules to win the championship.
It was a very under. The penalty was far too lenient. But if we accept they had the penalty, and the idea was it would penalise them, as it turns out, because of the way things are, the fact they've hit the ground running and they've developed a car that was already very good, they've done a very good job. They won't need to do much work on this one, and they'll be able to transfer across to the next car.
So have they had a lasting benefit from overspending?
Well, of course they have.
Okay, that's all I suppose that was the
it comes down to the fact they think they didn't even get the overspend taken off this year's budget. It's like, but we can argue that as much as we like, but it is a fact they've done a very good job, and hopefully haven't overspent this year. And certainly Mercedes kicked themselves on the foot. Ferrari haven't moved forward, and the only teams who are probably quite happy with themselves are Aston Martin and possibly Williams.
There's another race this weekend, but
there isn't.
Is it next weekend?
Next weekend.
So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be back with more team by team. That's what we've got time for this week.
At the weekend, I'll be at Sebring for the WEC Prologue. No coverage of the VP Fuels Racing Championship because there's no facilities up over the Prologue weekend, so don't expect any live coverage. There will be some timing of that and of WEC via Alcamel on the various areas of the internet. We'll be back live next Wednesday. Check RS1 and RS2 IMSA Radio for our on-air broadcast schedules, because we're on both of those channels for the weekend. There's no time to explain, by the way. The llama has been rather let down. Its pressures are too low.
This program is a Radio Show Limited production. For more, subscribe to Midweek Motorsport wherever you get your podcasts.